what is crisis today, and how is it different, maybe from?
Well, that's a difficult question because I think I'm working on that, on the concept of multiple crises. There are some people who are trying to cope with this notion because we are not experiencing just an economic or political crisis, and we are experiencing a political, a economic, a environmental crisis, a crisis of gender relations and social reproduction. And I'm trying to see how they are interrelated, this economic, political, gender, and environmental. And I think the Adorno's writing about capitalism are not so they're not so suitable to understand this kind of multiple crisis. That's, for example, Horkheimer's writings on authority and family, precisely because he identified the fact that in a moment of crisis, the I don't know the forms of rationalizing and organization of individuals' feelings are also at crisis. So this moment is a moment of crisis is in the sense a moment of disorganization of, uh, of rationality. So, and I think it's important to think that concept today because I think it's what we are living today, not only in the US, not only in Europe, but here also in Brazil with the election of Bolsonaro, for example. Because the question for me is why people that have supported, for example, the Workers' Party and Lula and Dilma, why they have voted in Bolsonaro? That's the opposite of Lula and Dilma. So I think we are living in that multiple crisis, and people lost the kind of the way they organize their lives. So Bolsonaro had offered a solution to them, an authoritarian solution. That's why I also try to recover the concept of crisis in Horkheimer, because he said that, well, the crisis has this moment of an authoritarian solution, but also an emancipatory solution. But I think today, as emancipatory politics are not on the horizon, so authoritarianism is more is winning today than emancipatory politics. So authoritarian politics offers this kind of solution to this multiple crisis. So it offers a solution not just only to political problems, economic problems, but also to, for example, gender relations. So we have the rise of feminist movements who challenge the way social reproduction is organized, and what those authoritarian movements states. Well, we must return to the traditional notions of family and gender relations to solve this crisis. And I think there, to some people, this is very attractive. Yeah, and that's why I'm trying to solve this, not to solve, but to understand this big turmoil we're living today.
Adorno had a kind of ambivalent, in my opinion, it seems like it was an ambivalent relationship to rationality. And in the sense that, I mean, obviously, it's dialectical as well, as in it's a liberating force, but it's also an oppressive force. But it seems like in the moments where he has these quotes where he's reflecting on his overall project, it seems like he's saying, I really do appreciate the Enlightenment and Enlightenment values and Enlightenment rationality. And what I hope to be able to do is to find a way to critique it so that the things about it that are liberating can be preserved without it turning in this oppressive direction. I'm trying to figure out how to preserve it.
I think when you use their form of dialectic, let's say determinate negation, I think for them, the materialists, that means the German materialists, somehow negated the German idealists, that means from Kant to Hegel, Fichte, and so on, too abstractly in their terms. That means the determinate negation or concrete negation means that you criticize and you reject, but you also at the same time you preserve, you elevate, you fulfill, and so on. And so this idea of freedom and all this is very idealistic. Maybe Fromm dropped out of the critical theory or was pushed out because he became too idealistic. So you are not supposed to become too idealistic, but you are nevertheless to preserve something. And that is this element of spontaneity. And behind that is the great disappointment that the working classes did not overthrow Hitler, that they did not overthrow Krupp and Thyssen and Siemens and so on, but that they remained neutral in the middle, and some of them workers even joined Hitler and so on. So that this moment of freedom, which was there to develop a new order, was completely missed. And so I think they still held on to alternative future number 3, the reconciled society, the free society, and so on, but at the same time became rather pessimistic in the sense that things are moving to alternative future number 1. That means a totally administered society or even the militaristic type of society. So there is this struggle there. They are very horribly disappointed. And after the Second World War, again, the men whom I mentioned, Kogon wrote the SS State. So they were all anti-fascists. And I was a prisoner of war here. I was trained here to go back to Germany and transform the fascist state into a liberal state. And we founded a party, the Christian Democratic Party, and we wanted to have workers and Christians together. And Adenauer overthrew this and put Catholics and Protestant bourgeoisie together and pushed the workers out with Schumacher and so on. And so no new solution came after this horrible catastrophe of the war, no new solution. But what they notice now, Weimar somehow came up again. That means the same society was reconstructed again, which had produced fascism in the first place. And therefore, the Frankfurt School was the only sociological school which predicted Trump. It was predictable if you, do the same thing again. And my German friends will say there was no choice, or we had little choice, and so on. That's true. I was in this whole thing, and it was very, very tough. What to do with the old Nazis. So they all came back again. Adenauer re-employed all the old Nazis again in Secret Service and everywhere. The currency reform was a Hitler reform, which was carried out in the Federal Republic and so on. So it was very difficult. But since one did not use that freedom or didn't have that freedom to produce a new order different from the one which led to fascism in the first place, therefore, one had to expect that 70 years later, Hitler thought it would take 200 years until fascism would come back. He was wrong again about timing. So it came much sooner. So I would also say that, the historical process goes on. The workers are there. Even the Germans say there are no workers anymore. I have a cousin who went to Belgrade, and they celebrated the Serbian workers which worked for Bosch, beautiful workers. And they were not, you did not remember that it took the Civil War, instigated by the Vatican and Germany and the CIA, in order to make those beautiful Serbian workers available for Bosch and so on. But the historical process goes there. Workers are there. There are 150 million workers here and no Labour Party. This is the only country which has no Labour Party in Congress. So and it is Bernie, of course, Sanders, I think, who's the only one who is fully aware, that one cannot have real change if not something is done about the ruling class. And is the only one who, expresses that truth. So now the critical theorists, there was only one who was in the Communist Party, and that was Marcuse for a short time in Berlin. But all the others never joined a party. But after they came back, and when I met them in Frankfurt, they then joined the the Social Democratic Party as a possibility. But the student rebellion and Adorno's trouble with the students, and the students followed the critical theorists, and at the same time were disappointed in them because they were not revolutionary enough. But they were afraid of the German Democratic Republic, where I taught too, that they would take advantage of this moment, revolutionary moment, and would the opposite would come about from what the students really intended. So that Adorno called in the police against his own students was a tragic moment. So, and when this, in the end, they had Leninist ideas to develop a communist manifesto along Leninist lines. If something like that should be done, I think what has to be reconsidered is to what extent new materialism will determinately negate the idealistic background. To leave it out completely, what Lenin and then Stalin, the wrong policies about religion and the return to a red fascism, and finally the loss against the neoliberal counter-revolution of 1989 and so on. There was something missing in this whole thing. That means too much of this idealistic background had been lost in the process and had not been seen. So I think a new materialism, which would rescue more idealistic elements, and how that is to be done, that has something to do with rationality, it has something to do with freedom, it has something to do with real actions in the historical process. Of course, they are dialectician fundamentally, and that means that the negativity of the present system is that what pushes beyond into a postmodern situation, which then determinedly negates the capitalistic system. But also this future, even if alternative future number 2 or 3, would preserve elements now. The jury system is a very good thing and should be rescued. There are many things now which are worthwhile to be rescued. Simply to say, like Khrushchev would say, we bury you or so, this abstract negation of the past leads to disaster. So
I'm this and connecting what you were just saying a little bit to what was talking about with Will before. How do we preserve what in the past is necessary, or aspects of idealism, to fend off, complete control of positivism and materialism? How do we preserve that without it being kind of an inauthentic, nostalgic, commodified version?
Determinate negation, as you have it in the phenomenology of Hegel and the logic, and then in the dialectic of enlightenment and so on. Determinate negation means, of course, that the negation has to be radical, has to be serious. But the question is, what in this negation still has to be preserved in order to make materialism possible? The greatness of materialism, it was invented by medical doctors, is the touch with the organism, with the organ pleasure, with organ displeasure, with the reality of our walking, talking, and so on. And this element, this sensitivity for human suffering, is something unbelievably important. So it must be a materialistic theory, but all these elements of idealism, which turns into ideology and so on, that has to be negated radically. True, but something has to be preserved, a Fichte or Schelling or so, and Kant particularly. One cannot go back behind Kant, the greatest of the bourgeois enlighteners. So it is this balance, between abstract and concrete negation. And in our present situation, so if the negativity of the present system is that what pushes on, the Roosevelt liberals, we only have 2 liberal parties. We have only 2 bourgeois parties. They are both liberal, but one is socially modified on the principle of subsidiarity, the New Deal, and the other one canceled that again and went back. So the neoliberals are really older than the New Dealers are. They thought capitalism would not have these crises anymore. So therefore, one could get from Keynes to Friedman, and one could deregulate, and one could privatize it. It would go well, and then came the catastrophe of 2008. And now there will be the next catastrophe because they did not regulate enough and still privatized and so on. So we could say that the people somehow in the last election, they were not upset about Clinton or the woman or what she looked like or whatever. I think that there is an anger there, a disappointment that this socially modified liberalism is not good enough anymore. And I would say if we cannot transform the Democratic Party into a Labour Party in the real sense, not only a party, open for labor or whatever, bourgeois sensitive for labor or so, but a real Labour Party, the Trump people, in one form or the other, will win again. I don't think that Biden, who represents that type of New Deal type of liberalism, that this is still good enough to make it. What they did was to diminish the negativity and therefore give the system a chance to last longer. The more you radicalize the capitalistic system, the faster the change will come.
There's so many lessons from the 20th century that have disappeared from a lot of public concern, I guess, which is potentially very problematic. But yeah, what you were saying about the neoliberals being, older than the New Deal liberals, that it's essentially a return to a philosophy that was already shown to be really problematic. It's similar.
Without the social modification, you see, which it was even the religion was used. I mean, the social encyclical was used by the Roosevelt people in terms of subsidiarity. So liberalism remained intact, but if you cannot help yourself, then the next unit must come up and help you, the county or whatever. So, but that this New Deal did not overcome the Depression, the war did.
Right.
So that is another thing. Yes, there are a lot of lessons from the, last century, which should be considered. So I founded, for instance, in the university, I founded the Humanistic Future Studies, in which we did all that, what I just said, but it was depressed. So Ossip Flechtheim was the one who developed that critical futurology. And I founded a course in Dubrovnik and in Yalta about these things. And it was here where it was depressed. So I did not know exactly, because the administration could not remember that Ossip Flechtheim was here in 1943, 44. And that he offered to 100 American universities this future studies program. And all of them said no. Only one of them asked the faculty and then said no, one president. So there is something in the system, which smells the rat. The associate dean had no clue whatsoever, historically, but she knew that there was something dangerous or what in the whole thing. The same is even with the word Hegel, who is a persona non grata. Why can he not be taught really here in this country? Because he remembers the ruling class, that the slaveholders, reminds them that the slaveholders went and that the feudal lords went, and the capitalists will go. And all of these ruling class want their people to believe that they are eternal. And Heraclitus and Hegel and Marx and so on told them that they are not eternal. That they will go. And that is what is dangerous. So therefore, Hegel also, he should be studied, and Kant should be studied. Philosophy department should not stop before they come to Kant. And they should not be afraid of using dialectics. In the Great Depression, it was repressed. It is not taught. because we thought the system collapsed, and then people should not collapse as well. So they should not think in terms of contradictions and transformations and so on. And so then we lost the wars against all dialecticians, General Jeet from the Zhukov school, the Butler generals from the Zhukov school. Wherever we have dialecticians, like General Zhukov and the German general on the other side, you have positivists on one side, you have dialecticians on the other side. Even if the dialecticians have less weapons, they will win. So to keep us in a pre-Hegelian logic and so on is disastrous for the educational system, for Bildung.
Did in my, what was it, second or third year at Boston College, I had somebody say to me, I don't think anyone actually reads Marx anymore. Somewhat constant. I was in this in a reading group that we were reading through the volumes of Capital, and so, you know, I don't think anybody actually reads Marx anymore.
I think in 2008, the German politicians all went to the library and read Marx again on Crisis.
Yeah, maybe that's more the United States.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, which is yeah, disturbing. All of these sort of, it's amazing, like, collection, centuries and centuries of brilliant thinkers. People are just kind of saying, people don't do that anymore.
Well, I think there's a perennial sense of anti-intellectualism here in Brazil, and I think it comes not only from the government, because not only the president but the Minister of Education are anti-intellectuals, and they prosecute teachers and professors at the university. There's a lawfare against some universities in Brazil, but I think it's as you said, it's a perennial characteristic in capitalism today. The sort of anti-intellectuals, people has not to think about what they are suffering and what they're experiencing, and they are how can I say it? They are ready to buy theories, like so-called theories like flat Earth, for example. I think that's a symptom of what anti-intellectualism is, because it's much more easier to think that there is a conspiracy between NASA, between George Soros and communist parties that dominate the world, than to think that there are contradictory relations in capitalism, class relations, and gender relations. That's much more difficult to think, and people have to cope with suffering when they try to understand the world. So I think that's a huge problem. About Marx and philosophy, well, Marx is still reading, teaching here in Brazil. I teach Marx for my students at postdoc fellowship. So there isn't so much places that teach Marx. Hegel is much more difficult, because even in philosophy courses, it's not so rare. I think there's an anti-Hegelian tradition here in Brazilian philosophy, that Hegel is just a book on the shelf as Marx at some point. But I think Marx is much more read than Hegel.
Too bad for the people, right?
Sorry?
Too bad for the people.
Yeah, too bad.
When Hegel wrote his dissertation in 1800, he thought there would be 7 planets. And then in the same year, they found out that there were 8. He said, too bad for nature.
Yeah, exactly.